A new Wordle puzzle is online. Click on the link to play.
Listening to the following video may give you clues. Please like and share the videos.
David Milgaard dies at 69. The tireless advocate for the wrongly convicted, David Milgaard died at the age of 69.
During his life, he was involved in a number of legal cases and helped to inspire the creation of an independent commission to review wrongful convictions. Here we pay tribute to Milgaard's life and work.
And, perhaps, you will agree that his case should be investigated further. David Milgaard was wrongfully imprisoned for 23 years.
David Milgaard, who was wrongfully convicted of a murder he did not commit, has died at age 69. During his 23 years in prison, he fought for the rights of the wrongfully convicted.
He was only 16 years old when he was arrested for raping Gail Miller, a nurse's aide in Saskatoon. During that time, Milgaard and his lawyers fought for an independent commission to investigate cases of wrongful convictions.
During his prison sentence, he was raped, his teeth were knocked out, and he demanded solitary confinement. He had several dozen slashes on his arms.
Some were from attempts at suicide, while others were commonplace in prisons. He hated having strangers stare at him.
Joyce Milgaard spent decades trying to win her son's freedom. She had gathered evidence against the serial rapist Laurie Fisher, who lived in the same basement apartment as Mr.
Milgaard. After completing DNA tests, DNA evidence proved that Milgaard did not kill Miller.
His mother and sister fought to free her son from Price and Earth case has been controversial for many reasons.
Incredibly, the police, in pursuing the case, were accused of tunnel vision. The lawyers in the case worked closely with his family for 2 decades.
Joyce believed that her son would have been left behind in prison if he hadn't been adamantly innocent. He credited his mother with helping him get free.
In 1992, he was released from prison, but he spent many years before being declared innocent. DNA evidence linked Larry Fisher to the murder.
He was a tireless advocate for the wrongly convicted. Despite his young age, David Milgaard spent nearly 2 decades in prison for a murder he didn't commit.
The convicted murderer, now 69 years old, was 16 when he was accused of killing a nurse in Saskatoon, Canada. His conviction was overturned after DNA evidence came to light.
He was officially exonerated in 1992. He spent his final years fighting for justice, raising awareness about wrongful convictions, and demanding action from Canadian courts.
In the past decade, Milgaard has worked tirelessly for the release of Larry Fisher, a man accused of murder and rape. The Canadian government helped him receive $10 million in compensation, and he campaigned for an independent review board.
He was also a champion for wrongfully convicted prisoners, and his efforts will be missed. A recent statement by former Justice Minister James Milgaard, the brother of one of David's fellow wrongfully convicted prisoners, describes how the case made him a popular activist for wrongful convictions.
He warned audiences that injustice could happen to them too. He even endorsed the creation of an independent commission to review wrongful conviction claims in Canada.
Following the death of Miller, the Saskatchewan government issued a formal apology and awarded Milgaard $1 million in compensation. In exchange, the government gave his family the money to go back to school, buy a house, and retire.
His mother Joyce continued to fight to clear her son's name, and DNA tests have now proved that Mr. Milgaard is innocent.
He helped spur the creation of an independent commission to review wrongful convictions. David Milgaard, a former convict who spent 2 decades in jail for a crime he didn't commit, has died at the age of 69.
He was convicted as a teenager of the 1969 rape and murder of Gail Miller, a nurse from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. In 1986, he was sentenced to life in prison.
His lawyer, David Asper, was his attorney for 19 years. He worked to clear his client's name and was eventually exonerated of all charges.
In 1992, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in Milgaard's favor, allowing him to be released from prison. However, the government of Saskatchewan did not agree to overturn the charges against Milgaard.
A trial was eventually held for the Miller murder, and serial rapist Laurie Fisher was convicted based on DNA evidence. The family of the convicted man, Joyce Milgaard, worked with James Lockyer to help get him released from prison.
In the years since, DNA tests were performed and Milgaard's innocence was proved. Despite the death, the case was a catalyst for reform in the criminal justice system.
The province invested $2 million in a public inquiry into the case and made 13 recommendations for reforms in policing and prosecution. The government also proposed establishing a federal commission to review wrongful convictions.
The Star's editorial board does not endorse any particular viewpoint. Despite his age and infirmity, the death of the Canadian activist David Milgaard is a sad day for all Canadians.
His wrongful conviction kept him in the public eye for years, and the attention it garnered made his death all the more tragic. The former Justice Minister, Owen Koffler, hopes the government will create such a panel to review such applications.
He died at 69. On November 18, 2017, David Milgaard, the convicted Indigenous man who spent almost 2 decades in prison for murder, died at age 69.
The former Justice Minister was a passionate advocate for other wrongfully convicted people. He warned people that injustice could happen to them, and he often advocated for a commission to review wrongful conviction applications.
Former Justice Minister Irwin Cotler hopes the Trudeau government will create such a panel. After spending almost 2 decades in prison, David Milgaard's mother Joyce helped his son's case through the years.
Joyce fought for the release of her son, and DNA tests proved that he was not responsible for the murder. However, his father was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
In 1997, DNA tests linked Larry Fisher to the crime, and Mr. Milgaard's conviction was overturned.
He died in 2015, after he was sentenced to life in Price and Earth case of David Milgaard was a seminal case in Canadian history.
The case was the first of its kind and continued to influence the lives of other wrongly convicted individuals. His family and supporters worked tirelessly to ensure that he was exonerated and released.
Many Canadians still believe that Milgaard was innocent of murder. He died in a hospital in Alberta after a brief illness.
During his long years in prison, David Milgaard was a dedicated advocate for the wrongfully convicted. After being wrongly convicted of murder, he spent 23 years in prison.
After his release, he was compensated. According to his sister, the cause of death was pneumonia.
However, the jury failed to find a motive, and Milgaard died of his illness at the age of 69. His legacy.
Michael Milgaard, a former justice minister and right-wing activist who was wrongfully convicted of murder, has died at 69. He was a committed supporter of wrongfully convicted persons.
He warned audiences that such injustices could happen to them, and advocated for a wrongful convictions review commission. Former Justice Minister Irwin Cotler hopes the Trudeau government will establish such a panel.
The case against Milgaard was a seminal one in Canadian history, and he died on Saturday at the age of 69. Despite his age, he was charged as an adult with murder in 1969.
The victim was a nurse's aide who was murdered at knife point. Afterwards, the case was dropped, and Milgaard received $10 million from the federal government.
While Michael was visiting the Canadian prisoner 6 weeks ago, he spoke of the need for an independent commission and the number of claims of wrongful conviction in Canada. He also spoke to the woman who had a claim.
The woman told him about the importance of keeping this stance in mind when filing a wrongful conviction claim. The Canadian government, in turn, issued a formal apology and awarded a $10 million compensation to the wrongful convict.
The death of David Milgaard, who was convicted of a crime he didn't commit, has triggered a national debate. After spending over 2 decades in jail, he was recently awarded $1 million in compensation.
His mother and sister shared the money with his family. Fortunately, the money was enough to allow his family to go back to school, buy a house, and even retire.